Welcome to this week's episode of Being Human. I'm delighted to say my guest this week is Dave Gray. He's the founder of Explain, a multiple author. And for the topic of this week's podcast, he wrote the book Liminal Thinking. Dave, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Richard. Great to be here.
So I first heard the term liminal from a previous guest on the show, Dave Snowden. It was intrigued me as a term, and he uses it in the context of his complexity framework. I then discovered this realm of liminal thinking, and then your book. I've now digested that book with relish. So perhaps we could start with sharing with the audience what we mean by the term liminal, actually, and then we can broaden out to liminal thinking.
Yeah, liminal simply means the space between. So liminal can be a space or a time. So liminal time might be while you're waiting for a bus. Liminal space might be a bus station or airport where people are in transition. So liminal simply means a state or time of transition where you're between one state and another.
Okay, and liminal thinking?
Well, liminal thinking is a way of applying that idea of being in an in-between state and to find ways to do it intentionally to change your life. So if you feel like you're stuck or in habits and routines that are not working for you, liminal thinking is a way to apply liminality to change that, to initiate changes in your life and your world.
Right. So it's deliberately going into this, I don't know, the word that comes to me is something like a neverland or a state in between, deliberately entering that space as a way to invite change or to have change happen?
Deliberately break patterns and try on new ones to see if they can be more successful for you. So it's a very experimental approach. I came to the term comes from anthropology, actually, and it originates with rites of passage. So when people are studying people who have initiation rites from childhood to adulthood and that kind of thing. That's where the term originally came from. You're in between. There's a period where you're in these rituals where you're no longer a child and you're not yet an adult, and that's where it originally came from. And I originally started out to write a book on agility. I was trying to find and interview people who had been able to be successful in very unpredictable and chaotic environments. Whether it's, I talked to people who were in, I talked to soldiers, I talked to people who are in, ambulance drivers and firefighters and, all kinds of people who operate in zones or areas where there's a lot of unpredictability and they have to be very agile. And the original title of the book was, I think, agile thinking or something like that. And what I came to discover is that the people who are good at navigating these kinds of environments also happen to be good at creating liminal space and time for themselves and being able to sort of, it turns out that they tend to be agile about their belief systems. There's a lot of the times the things that are stopping you from being successful happen to be beliefs that are, you've developed over many years, and but they're no longer true. And you think about fighting wars when you used to fighting against armies and now you're fighting against guerrillas and terrorists. You have to change your thinking quite a bit, and the old ways don't work anymore. And I think that's true for a lot of people in a lot of situations, business people as well. When, I don't have a customer right now that isn't concerned about Amazon and companies like Amazon that are rapidly disrupting the business landscape. And again, people are in a situation where the old ways of doing things, the old methods don't seem to work. They're doing them harder and they're still failing. And so that's often the case in businesses that have been around for a long time that are being disrupted by new and different thinking kinds of competitors. So it turns out liminal thinking, or being able to think differently, is really, really important uh, for business people as well.
Right. And so liminal thinking is about thinking differently, but it's a sort of very specific way of thinking about thinking differently, right?
Yeah, there are some principles and practices. You've read the book, so
Mm.
I don't have to tell you, but it's broken down into 6 principles and 9 practices that help you. And the book has exercises in it and things that you can try out. And a lot of it has to do with learning how to try on different beliefs. And you don't have to believe something is true in order to act as if it was true. And so, part of what, I think one of the core aspects of the book is that you can explore what other things might be true in terms of your belief systems. You could try on some different beliefs, even if they seem ridiculous or improbable. You can adopt them, you can adopt them on a kind of a temporary basis and try and act as if they're true to see what happens. And what people often find is that you might have a belief, for example, that your boss hates you, and but the truth is that because you have that belief, you act as if the belief is true, and you tend to reinforce the belief, and you tend to make what you tend to believe often will tend to make things true. If in the case of competing against Amazon, many people believe it's hopeless. There's nothing they can do. There's no options that they have. And in that case, I think it's very important for people to start thinking about, well, what else might be true? What do we have? We still have customers. Why do we have customers? And to start to ask them. And I think in many cases in the business world, it comes down to getting better at talking to your customers and listening to customers and listening between the lines to things they may or maybe not saying. And sometimes it comes down to listening better to frontline employees. And you might think they have, nothing to say, but often the frontline employees are more up to date with the current realities of business, and the people at the top were on the front line 20, 30 years ago. So they've become somewhat removed from the realities of the business. And when things are changing as rapidly as they are today, you can get out of date pretty quickly, and you can get out of touch pretty easily.
So part of this is about sort of actively going out and seeking out beliefs that might be different to your own.
Yeah, absolutely. Getting out of a lot of the book is about getting outside of your bubble and how bubbles get created. Bubbles of belief, I call them. And you can get into, we all have people that we hang out with, people that we talk to, people that we listen to. And over time, what can happen is you can get in this bubble of belief where you're reinforcing your existing beliefs and you're not really exploring the stuff that's outside of that. And why would you? Because why would you explore beliefs that seem ridiculous or improbable or unlikely? And a famous one that I do discuss in the book is Detroit, when Japanese cars started coming into the U.S. market, and the Detroit had been, the companies in Detroit had been building cars in a such and such a way for so many years that they couldn't conceive of other ways of doing it. And so they had some thoughts about what it costs to build a car, how you build a car, that were pretty cemented. And at first they just couldn't believe that, Japanese cars could be built so cheaply and at such high quality. And it took 20, 30 years before they actually started to, break down their belief systems and start to, get with the program. And now they've caught up to a great degree, but it can take a long, long time to even begin to question your beliefs, especially when they've worked for you for so many years. They've worked well.
Right. And you say in the book, this quote, people rarely test ideas for external validity when they don't have internal coherence. So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
break that down a little bit. Yeah.
Well, beliefs are funny, and a belief is simply a story in your head. And a belief that has internal coherence is one that makes sense, and one that you don't tend to question beliefs that make sense. And the fact is that the world is constantly changing outside you, and so we all know people as they get older, they get maybe more rigid in their beliefs. We all have parents who have what we might consider to be outdated ideas, and sometimes it can be hard to you go to family events on the holidays and you get in arguments sometimes with parents and uncles and so forth who seem to have crazy ideas, or they seem to be in their bubble, you seem to be in your bubble, and you have conflict. You see this on social media a lot as well, and the political realm. The people who are in one political camp have their stories. People in another political camp have their stories, and you have events happen. They get interpreted through a lens and through a story, and that's what I mean by internal coherence. And when you have internal coherence, you look around to the people who agree with you, and you tend to associate with people who agree, and that's how belief bubbles form. And it's very hard to get outside of that. Go outside, and it's not comfortable to go to talk and actually listen to people who disagree with you and try and ask yourself, well, what if that were true? How would I act differently if that were true?
Yeah.
That's just
And
hard. It's hard to do, and most people don't do it. But the truth is that that's where you're going to get your most of your new ideas and most of your innovation is by going outside your bubble. They say, get outside the building is a phrase that people often use to say, you're not going to get any new ideas sitting inside your office, sitting inside the building. You're going to get new ideas going out and visiting other companies, going to visit customers, and so forth.
right. And have you got an example of when you've stepped outside of your bubble and your experience of that, but personally?
Oh yeah, well there are a lot of them. I mean, I think there's one thing that I try and do is I try and look at news media, a lot of different news media, and so we have here in the U.S. we have this whole war on terror that started on 9/11, and I started looking at Al Jazeera for news, and I think that you start to see things from a very different perspective when you start, and it's easy to do nowadays, although a lot of people don't do it. But it's easy to, go find alternative news sources and look at different sources of information and kind of expand your bubble. And when I was writing the book, I did that. I did my first series of interviews, and they were people that I knew and people that were recommended to me. And they were video interviews, and I had done about 15 or 20 interviews, and I was looking at the page one day, and I realized they all looked like me. They were all middle-aged white men, and I didn't at first know how to break out of that bubble. And they were all often kind of saying a lot of the same things. Many of them were leaders or well-known people in the agile software community, and so I went on Facebook and I asked for help, and it was uncomfortable because I got some mixed kind of comments like, what? Oh, you only want to talk to me because I'm a woman, or you only want to talk to me because I'm black, and that's not very flattering, or but the truth is you have to go and you have to make yourself vulnerable to get outside of your bubble sometimes. And what did happen was I had a few people respond to me privately and introduce me to people, and that's where the book really started to take shape and where I really started to learn, when I started to talk to people who were in very different communities that I didn't usually talk to.
Right. And can you think of an example where you got a kind of a belief challenge through one of those conversations?
Hmm. Well, I was doing my best to listen, and I can't think of one off the top of my head. I'm sorry.
Mm. No, but that makes sense. It actually refers to something in the book, because one of the things I liked was you, you talked about a particular consultant in the book who when he entered companies, he had this particular. In fact, no, he'd gone out to, I think it was Somalia. That was the
Oh
story,
yeah,
and
yeah.
he's out. I think it's Mogadishu, and the story is ultimately about, how he how he fixes refrigeration
Yeah.
for
Hmm.
a fish market. But well, actually, you tell the story and the questions and the way in which he approaches his conversations. I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, his name was Mitch. I'm not getting it. His last name isn't coming to me right now, but uh, he somehow he came to the awareness that the he saw a fisherman catching plenty of fish, and he noticed that people were still having problems, and he recognized that one of the issues was that there was no refrigeration. So the fishermen weren't making any money because everyone knew that at the end of the day they had to sell the fish, uh, or they were out of luck. They had to throw them away. So people would come at the end of the day to buy the fish, and the fishermen weren't really making a sustainable living. And there wasn't any electricity in Somalia at the time. And so he, and a lot of liminal thinking is about noticing things that you don't ordinarily notice. And he was walking in a part of the city that had no electricity, and I think he got a lemon ice, like some kind of a icicle or ice cone, and he thought to himself, "How did this happen?" And he asked how this was done, and he found out that there was a guy who had these giant sort of, I think they were just giant sort of sarcophagus shaped containers with I think car batteries attached to them, where he was somehow finding a way to make ice, and he was able to get that technology transferred to the fish market and help that situation.
Right. And I think that point about noticing was the seminal point for me in that story, because he went around and he opened these asked these really open questions, like, describe your day,
Mm-hmm.
like what's the biggest challenge in your day right now, like trying as much as, at least the way I read it, trying as much as possible to put any beliefs he might have about the situation to the back of his mind, and just open and asking these very open questions.
Actually, now I do remember a time where when I was writing the book, when my beliefs were totally challenged, in fact, totally shattered. And I was talking to a woman who, again, whose name escapes me right now, but she said to me, I told her I was writing a book on agility. And she said, well, and I was talking about the world being more complex than it used to be. And she disabused me pretty quick of both of those notions. First, she said, well, agility is just a fad. It's being agile doesn't help any more than being rigid. It's just a thing. Agility isn't something to be that's special. Everything depends on the situation. And she said, if you think the world is more complex than it used to be, try living in the woods for a month. It's always been complex, and it always will be complex. And it isn't any more complex now than it was thousands of years ago when we were hunter gatherers, living off the land. And so she sort of threw me off my whole plan for my book and everything, because I realized she was right. And actually a few months, I was kind of completely crushed, because my whole book had fallen apart, and all the premises were gone, and I was in a liminal state that didn't feel very good. It felt like being in the belly of the whale, or in the pit in Star Wars, the garbage pit. I was just like dumped into this very low state, and but it turned out that was the turning point, and that was the thing that helped me see that the book wasn't really about agility at all. It was about beliefs, and how we form them, how we change them, how we come to replace outdated beliefs with better beliefs. And that's an ongoing process that is a lifelong thing.
Right. Right. And so the way that the book is structured is in the first one, you talk about, part one's called How Beliefs Shape Everything, and how they kind of defend themselves. They're tied to identity. They're like this fixed material. I'm struck by this image in the book where you have a guy like holding a cloud, as if it's a belief is like a thing. It's like this material that kind of binds us in some sense, right? And they create this shared world. And then you talk about like what to do about it. And I think we've started to touch on that. So one of it is about going out there and deliberately seeking out people who may have beliefs that are different to yours, asking these open questions, like an observer seeking to notice what might be different. Of the practices that you enumerate in the book, which are the ones that have really worked well for you in kind of developing this skill?
I think one of my favorite is act as if. And that simply means, even if you don't believe something is true, you can choose to act as if it was true. Back to the example of you think your boss hates you. Well, you can choose to imagine that your boss likes you and start to act as if that were true. And, then you can say, okay, well, what would I do differently? Would I ask my boss to lunch? Would I smile more? Would I show up to meetings in a different way? Would I do my work differently? And you can, even if you don't believe something to be true, you can act as if it were true. And what people often find is that acting as if something is true leads to discovering that they actually are true, because our actions are our thoughts and our actions are a much bigger part of those systems than we think they are. And the fact is that we tend to perpetuate our beliefs and make them into self-fulfilling prophecies by the way that we act.
Right. So act as if this other thing were true, right? And you have that wonderful, this other belief were true. And you have this wonderful story in the book in Dallas, where they make some changes to the street furniture, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. That was actually where they broke a law, actually, or they broke some regulations. There were I think one of the guys had been to Europe and he had seen cafe tables on the streets and a lot of these things that make streets more livable and more pedestrian friendly and bike friendly. And he came back to Dallas and looked at all the big wide streets and the freeways and really felt he wanted to see something like that happening in Dallas. And I think it was Dallas. And
that's right.
He went and I think he went and looked up some of the regulations and found that there were all kinds of regulations that were against that. But he decided for a weekend, or I think it was a week or a weekend, to just make it happen. And he picked an area and they painted new lines on the streets and they put tables out and they got the restaurants and local shops to agree to it. And they literally changed the whole street around. And I believe they invited some of the regulators, some of the people who were and the politicians down to see what they had done. And they asked them why these regulations existed. And it turns out, in fact, nobody knew why they existed, and I believe, if I remember right, he was able to even change some of the regulations.
Right, because again, the book you talk about, so these city officials come down and see this wonderful site, and he challenges them, why have we got these rules? And the city officials are like, well, we don't really know. They've just kind of grown up over time, and some of them are hundreds of years old, and so it was a way of challenging their beliefs by taking action, in a radical way, but had them jump out of their belief bubble.
Yeah, and again, that's a way of acting as if. And I think, we get into patterns, and in a lot of ways our lives are like this kind of hypnotized dance where we do one thing and other people react, and we act in a predictable way and other people react in a predictable way and other people react in a predictable way, and we're constantly being predictable, and we like routine. People don't like strange or unpredictable things, and so that seems normal. And what you can do though is when you go off that dance, when you start acting in an unpredictable way, you sort of throw off the whole zombie routine, and you start to introduce new and fresh ideas, and that can be good or bad. But if you're really not happy with the status quo, then that's a good way to get started.
Right, the pattern interrupt. In fact, you share about the story with your wife and your son and the Wi-Fi. Is that right?
Yeah, just going off script is a great way to kind of shake things up. You don't even have to know why you're going off script, or you don't even have to have a plan necessarily. You start doing something just different than you would typically do. I talked to a guy, I have a friend who was telling me the story of how there was a cemetery near where he lived. He lived in England, in northern England. And there was a cemetery. He would just go and walk in the cemetery. And it was a quiet place. He would walk and maybe sit down. And it was next to a church. And unbeknownst to him, there was a priest in the church who noticed him walking around out there. And so he got the church to put out a couple of benches and then a table, and then they started serving sandwiches on Sundays. And he didn't find out till much later that all of this started because he was simply walking around in the cemetery, and he was spending time there. And this was something, again, that the priest noticed, again, noticing and paying attention and trying to support. And so the guy was simply trying to support something that he already observed happening. He wanted more community around the church. He maybe had never thought of the cemetery as a place that could be social, but he saw something starting to happen, and then he began to support it, and it gradually, I believe now it's a pretty, they're talking about putting more tables and serving more food, and it's becoming more and more of a social hub. And it just started with him, one guy walking around in the cemetery.
Right. And then the priest noticing it and allowing himself not to be fixed by a belief, well, community happens in the church, or I reach my parishioners. And kind of going with it, right? Going with what's emerging. Yeah. No, I like that. So yeah, that was it. In fact, that's another one of your practices, right? Disrupt routines, practice 6. You've got a couple. Well, I think the other one is one that sounds great, but it's difficult. The idea of emptying your cup. And you talk about the story. There was a famous story, really, with the Zen master and the professor. Is it worth sharing that for people? I quite like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a famous one, so many people may have heard it. But the story is that a guy, an American, goes to the Zen master and wants to study with him, and he won't stop talking about Zen. And the master is pouring him tea, and the tea starts overflowing the cup, and the guy says, "Stop filling my cup, it's already full." And he said, "Well, that's you. I can't teach you because your cup is full." And I think that most of us are walking around in our lives and our cups are full. We have all of our ideas. We know who the assholes are. We know who the good people are. We know we have put people into categories. We know what companies are good companies and what companies are bad companies, and where the bad parts of town are, and all this. And we have all these, our cup is full with all these notions about the world that we don't ever test. And before you can actually start testing your beliefs, you have to kind of try and empty out your mind of those beliefs and try and experience things as if you're experiencing them for the first time. And that can be difficult. And it's not always wise. I mean, you don't always want to just walk into situations that could be dangerous without caution. And so I think it's something to be done carefully. But I think it's when you meet a person, perhaps judging them by their appearance is a bad idea. Or going too quickly to judgment about other people is, again, having your cup already full. We all have prejudices, and we couldn't get through life without some stereotypes and prejudices. But it's important to bring those into check and give people a chance and situations a chance if you want to expand your horizons. Because the truth is that everyone has a reality and belief system that's based on their experiences, and you will never know. I will never know what it's like to grow up as a Black American, for example. I can only guess. I can only imagine, but I never had those experiences, and I will not have those experiences. So I'll have a different reality and different beliefs. Different beliefs about a lot of things, the work environment, police, politics, etc. And so right. I think it's, if you, often the instinct when someone disagrees with you is to argue, or has a different experience. It's often quick to go to argument, and I think it's much more interesting to open yourself up and spend some time listening and trying to really hear other people without interrupting, without judging. And that's a good example of what I mean by emptying your cup. Learning to ask questions, learning to be curious, learning not to, quickly move to judgment. I think that's something that people, I've seen it a lot in engineers. Engineers have a very, prescribed way of looking at the world. Engineers are problem solvers. They have techniques that work for them. And I've noticed that sometimes engineers can be quick to go, well, that can't be done. Or, and sometimes that is based on an idea that things have to be done a certain way, or that, there's one way to do things, or, or they have a way of doing things. And, there's a famous saying, surgeons always recommend surgery. Surgeons solve problems by cutting people open. So when a surgeon comes across a problem, the first place they go, of course, is cutting people open. And that isn't necessarily always the best option. So we all need to be aware that we're walking through life with a certain bubbles and a certain amount of blinders, and that we are only seeing a limited subset of reality. And the more that you want to see change or different things happen in your life, the more you need to kind of expand your horizon. And that means going to places that you don't normally go, talking to people that you don't normally talk to, listening to people that you don't normally listen to, and suspending your disbelief, suspending your judgment.
Right. And so in terms of how you practice this, is this for you when you're in conversation, making sure you ask certain types of questions? Is it meditation? What is it that you sort of practically do that our listeners might be able to learn from in terms of emptying your cup?
Well, like you, I enjoy interviewing people. I try and ask people, I try and look for people that are outside of the beaten track that maybe aren't heard from so much. I try and ask questions that give them the chance to talk about things that I might not ask. Sometimes I love to ask the question, what haven't I asked you that?
Right. Yeah.
there's there's such a thing as an open question, which is a question that doesn't lead to a yes or no. You've asked me quite a lot. So what do you think about this? Or an open question just allows someone to go into a ramble or a rant or a story that might lead you to new insights that you wouldn't have otherwise. So, and I think, social media is very interesting because it's very good at reinforcing bubbles and reinforcing existing beliefs. But you can expand your horizons also on social media if you learn how to use it that way. And by looking at news sources that maybe are outside of your country, I find, and not everyone can do this, but I've been lucky in the sense that I've been able to travel the world. Getting inside of another culture, being able to immerse yourself in other cultures for a while. I lived in Spain for a year. Those kind of things can really help because you start to see the world very, very differently. Some people who live and experience life very differently. You can, I think that traveling is one of the best things. And to some degree, I'm jealous of those people who live in Europe because in the U.S., we have this huge, huge country without a lot of variety, without a lot of diversity. And, at least from one city to another, or from one part of the country to another, compared to Europe, where you have so many different, very different cultures, different languages, different traditions, different cultures within a very small footprint. So it's much easier in Europe to get those different experiences and experience different cultures than it is in the U.S.
Right. And even now, as I'm thinking, I've got a cheeky thought going, oh, here's one of your bubbles. Here's a belief you've got about Europe.
Or about the U.S.
Yeah.
Yeah, could be.
It's funny. I've become much more attuned to it. And earlier when you were talking about engineers, I was thinking, oh, there's a belief about engineers.
It is it's a belief, and I'm happy to have my beliefs challenged.
Not that I'm challenging them per se, but I'm just noticing that you've sort of raised my awareness and consciousness around, the fact that we're all kind of running a script that's sort of founded in beliefs. And I'm also thinking about there's somebody in my life who will remain nameless, who in certain scenarios I go into a script of there being a tyrant, right? This is the story in my head, there being a tyrant, and then I'm kind of gearing myself up for the actions I should take.
How do you react to a tyrant? What's your reaction?
I'm trying to formulate different strategies. Like, I need to push back really hard, or I need to make them aware of how tyrannical they're being, or but all of it comes from how do I deal with a tyrant, and I'm as I'm talking to you, I'm thinking, well, what if my script, what if my belief were different? This person was being, I don't know. Really mindful about their well-being right now, for example. How would I react then? And but it takes this reflection, doesn't it? It takes this time to kind of to the space. We talked about space in the book. This idea about being in the space in between. But you almost have to create my space from myself, right? So I have to kind of somehow distance the set of beliefs I have, be an observer of my own mind somehow. I know that's probably not possible at some level, but that idea that I can be that seems to be emerging for me as we talk.
Yeah, and giving yourself time to reflect. Your meditation can be good, but just giving yourself enough time to maybe just sit and stare into space and without really trying to think about anything. Giving yourself a little bit of open space in your life where you don't have anything special to do or anything planned, and let things come to you, and just, lie on your back in the grass and look at the sky or whatever it might be.
Yeah, that makes sense. You talk at the back of the book about the philosophical underpinnings and some of the thinking here. You mentioned the American Pragmatists. You talk about something called non-Aristotelian logic, which I thought was interesting. You talk about Plato, metaphor of the cave. Of the philosophical sort of influences here. Which were the strongest for you?
Well, this is something I've come across maybe a little bit more since writing the book, but liminal thinking has a lot of overlap with something called cognitive behavioral therapy. So cognitive behavioral therapy is the idea that what you think can influence your behavior. And I think there's certainly a lot of overlap. So if people want to read up on, outside of my book, they want to read up on some of this stuff, I think cognitive behavioral therapy would be a good place to start. And a lot of that started with something called brief therapy, which emerged in the Silicon Valley area in the 60s. I mean, before it was called Silicon Valley, back when it was still hippie land. And but brief therapy was very much about disrupting routines and, introducing unpredictable, thoughts and ideas into situations.
Right. Well, that's worth noting for people then. Brief therapy. Yeah, and what struck me about the American Pragmatists, which it comes up a lot when I study complexity, and a couple of our guests who've been big into complexity reference the American Pragmatists, and this idea of knowing the world as inseparable from the agency within it. So, like, I'm somehow constructing my world as I live it. Right, that seems to be a pertinent idea that perhaps sits behind this thinking. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, William James is one of the most prominent of the American Pragmatists, and one of the things that he has said is that a theory should not be judged on whether it's true or not, because a theory is more like a tool. A theory should be judged on whether it gets you results, whether it works or not. And it's a very different way of thinking about theories. If you think about, we argue a lot about whether things are true, and we less often test whether they work. And we expect all of our theories again to be internally coherent with each other. All of our theories should work together, and that's a great and noble goal for science. But they don't all work together. Even in science, they don't all agree, and it's actually a very good idea. I mean, it's not necessarily necessary that they agree for them to work. If you think about, and it's at the same time, in the same way that it's not necessary for all of us to agree for us to work together to do things. And it's easy to focus on areas of disagreement, and it's we can often it's often the case that those disagreements are productive. Those are areas that are worth exploring, but they're worth exploring within the context of, well, we're trying to do the same thing. And diverse ideas can lead to a lot of times to new insights and new ways of doing things, as opposed to arguments.
Right. So I think I'm getting two things there. So one is that we have different theories about how the world works, right? But also we should judge a theory based on whether has practical merit.
Yeah.
Right. And that's,
for example, religion. Should we judge religions on whether they're true, or should we judge them whether they're successful for people?
Right.
And if you judge them based on whether they're true or not, well, you certainly can't. It's very hard to reconcile, all the religions of the world with each other. And many of them are exclusionary. But if you judge them on whether they're successful or whether they work, then they all do work in different ways for different people.
Right. Yeah, I can see how that would create opening, and it becomes much easier for me to explore a theory if I'm coming at it from that basis, right? Does this work for you? Mm-hmm. Or could I imagine how this might work for you? Rather than, is this right? Does this fit with my understanding of the world? I can actually, right? It's a very different frame to be coming from. Mm-hmm. Or even, why does this theory work for people? That could be another.
Yeah, absolutely. Or how did you come to this idea? or what, when was the first time you thought about it this way? When did you first, there's an important idea in the book called a governing belief, which is a belief that's sort of at the root of your identity. And it's a beliefs about yourself. And those tend to be very core. I'm confident. I'm a loser. I'll never win. I'm on top of things. I've got my shit together. Whatever that might be. Those are beliefs that are so core to your identity that changing if they're challenged or they can truly be shattering. And those are really tough ones to get over. But they can also lead to some of the most important transformations. You think about people who have been alcoholics and broken that habit. For me, quitting smoking was a big one. I didn't believe it was something I didn't believe I could do. But once I had done it, then suddenly I felt like anything was possible for me. I gained a huge amount of confidence and very rapidly after that changed a lot of things about my life. So
right.
These things, these kind of core beliefs about yourself are important to, and it's important to understand that they're not necessarily as rock solid as you might think they are. That they're still, even though they're core beliefs about yourself, that they're somehow vulnerable, and people will tend to protect them. And so you want to be careful when you're probing around people's core governing beliefs. You can get them into very defensive mode very quickly.
Right, and that comes back to the pragmatist idea, because if I'm coming at their governing belief from the perspective of, well, how does this work for you, and why does it work for you, and how's this practical for you, then that's again a different stance than why do you have this?
Right.
Right. No, I can see that. Well, and congratulations on quitting smoking. That's
Thank you.
So how long was that ago? How long ago was that?
25 years now.
Okay. All right.
Maybe 30.
Yeah. I had some similar shifts through doing therapy and coming to a belief I'm loved and lovable is something that took me a lot of work to get to, and that really shifted my ability to relate to others, to have intimate relationships.
This can happen. Someone in their 50s worked for a company forever, gets laid off, for example. There are many of these kind of life-shaking events that can really throw you for a loop, and those can be really rough times on a large level or a small level, like I described with what happened with my book, where my whole project, my year-long project collapsed under me, and I had to kind of reconstruct it from the ashes, so to speak. That's a sort of a smaller one, but they happen in small and large ways all the time, and being able to be flexible about your belief systems enables you to recover and continue to grow and change. And keep up with the world around you.
Yeah, and you mentioned in the book about a friend of yours who does turnarounds for companies, and his reflection that a lot of companies can be turned around if new management goes in, because so often management are running on a set of governing beliefs that no longer fit their circumstance. Right?
Yeah, in fact, I think he told me that when they acquire a company, they almost always get rid of the management, because the management is usually the problem. And it's usually a rigid set of beliefs that have worked in the past well, but are no longer working. He works for an equity company that buys distressed companies and turns them around.
Yeah. Now, the sort of humanitarian in me wants to say, yes, but there might be some tools in your book that would allow one to explore those governing beliefs.
Yeah, that's my hope. That people get these get this going before it's too late, because by the time the turnaround guy comes, it is too late.
You're
And
right.
so, to get people thinking outside of their bubble earlier when there's still time and there's still money and resources and so forth is pretty important.
Yeah.
People can be in denial for a long time, and the company can last for a long time on its past glory, and till there's nothing left.
Right. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to use one of the questions you suggested to me. So, is there a question that you would have expected to have been asked that I've not asked you?
I'm good. I'm happy with your questions. I appreciate your time, and I'm good.
That's good. That's good to hear. Well, I certainly feel like you've been a great teacher on this call. I've learned a lot. You've deepened my understanding of having read the book. This term that was somewhat esoteric to me, before reading this idea of liminality or liminal spaces has a much richer meaning. So, and I hope also for those listening to this conversation.
Well, thanks for having me.
No, thank you. So for those who want to learn more, for those who are watching, you'll see on the screen here the Liminal Thinking book by Dave Gray. You can find it on Amazon. And where else would you send people, Dave?
People can find me on LinkedIn or Twitter. I'm Dave Gray on Twitter. And those are probably the easiest ways to find me. And I have a personal website, explainer.com, xplaner.com. And my company is explain.com, so it's xplane.com. And if you wanted help with your organization, that'd be the place to go.
Great. Well, again, thank you so much. And I also know on your website you've got some videos and some talks as well. For those who are interested in reading the book, they could check you out in audio visual formats as well. So once again, thank you so much for the conversation and for your time. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you.